Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Okay, well to Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim.
This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics. I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay. Hello, listeners, and welcome to a seasonal edition of the Irish Passport podcast. It's Christmas time again. I hope everyone is having a lovely time and preparing for the holidays coming up. And since we're in a holiday mood, Naomi, we have decided to release one of our, what is usually a Patreon-only exclusive benefit for our patrons to all of our listeners for this. And this is one of our listener question episodes, right?
Yeah, so a little festive gift, if you will, releasing this to the general feed to give you guys an idea of, if you're not signed up already, what you might be missing out on over on Patreon. So if you like the sound of what you hear, do sign up with us over there. It's really awesome to have your support. And if you sign up for the €5 tier or more, then you get to ask your own questions, whatever you want, and we'll answer them in these listener questions episodes. Also, we want to point out some really good news. For the first year,
Yes.
Patreon has introduced gift memberships. So this is now something you can gift to someone else, which you couldn't before.
Yes, indeed. So that means that if you maybe don't want to become a patron yourself, or maybe if you already are a patron yourself, but you have somebody in mind that you know would enjoy maybe access to over 100 extra episodes, extra content of all sorts, images, little videos, even some recipes in there. We have all kinds of lovely stuff in there. So if you know someone who would like access to that, you can gift them a membership for Christmas. You can even do it if you forget your actual Christmas present. You can quickly take out your phone and maybe do it under the Christmas table and say, oh, look, check your email box. I've been thinking about this all year. So very handy. Keep that in the back of your mind in case you need it, because it's a lovely gift, I would say.
Apparently, I was just reading the explanation page there, and you can gift anything from 1 month membership to a full year. So really just, it can cost basically whatever you want, really. And it's an awesome thing to do from our perspective, because every sign up that we get just keeps us with the security that we need to keep the podcast going. So we really, really appreciate it. I hope you head on over to do that. And what we'll do is we will post the link to the explanation about how to gift membership in the show notes. So just follow that and you should be able to find out everything you need to know about how to sign up if needed and how to get a gift membership.
Okie doke. All right, so let's take a look at some of the questions that we had come in to us from patrons. What's our first one, Naomi?
Okay. Yes, this is one for you, Tim.
Okay.
Let me just pull it up here. Oh, by the way, I need to say, please excuse my slightly husky voice. It's the seasonal illness that's getting everybody. It's going from it stalks the household currently, and I'm the latest to succumb. So this one comes from Finbar. He says, Dear Naomi and Tim, I am particularly interested in the conquest of Ireland, and having listened to the series, the Conquest series, of course, when published, I am working my way through it again. I would like to know more about what happened in Ulster after the flight of the Earls and onwards. I've been told recently that Ulster was not particularly well populated, which somehow gave license for the plantation of Ulster, but somehow I am suspicious of this opinion. Yeah, I get that, Finbar. Where could I go to find out more about the people living here during and after the 9 Years' War? Many thanks for your message and love the podcast. Thank you, Finbar. It's a great question.
Great question, Finbar. Yes, indeed. And you probably have heard that, actually, that Ulster was quite a depopulated place at the point when the plantations started. We did cover a little bit of this in some of our Conquest series, and there's two main reasons for that. One of them was real and one of them was fake. So you're indeed right to be suspicious. So one of the fake reasons was that when the English looked at particularly Ulster, they saw a place that wasn't being intensely farmed in the way that they intensely farmed a place. So I think we mentioned was it our Lost World of Gaelic Ireland episode? It must have been. The differences between the different parts of Ireland and how the Gaelic societies functioned. And one of them was that in Ulster, people were almost entirely nomadic. So this wasn't the case in most of Ireland. People were kind of semi-nomadic or seasonally nomadic which I don't know even know if nomadic even fits the bill there. But in Ulster, people just really did keep moving around. That didn't mean that they didn't kind of use the land. They were just using the land in this very dynamic way where they were moving from place to place, places that they knew. Now, that actually brings us to a question that we're going to talk later about townlands, because there's a link there. So keep that in mind, this idea of knowing the landscape and knowing where you're going in this kind of nomadic way. But what it meant...
Are they going with like large herds of cattle and stuff? Is
Yes.
that the system?
Yes.
Right. So there's going to be certain lands where the cattle will feed well and like fatten up and stuff, and certain places where they're going to like breed and have calves and stuff. And I imagine the moving around is to do with the annual cycle of the animals. That's what it is in places where that still goes on anyway.
It is, absolutely, yeah. So it's partly to do with the annual cycle of the animals, just bringing them to pasture and bringing them to the mountains and what have you. But it's also to do with kind of keeping your stake to territory. So moving your herd, these massive monster herds of cows and cattle, cows and sheep and all kinds of animals, these massive herds would kind of lay stake to land in a cyclical way. So these are the lands that the O'Neills use, in May. And the O'Neills might kind of show up and suddenly they'll see the O'Dohertys are there instead, So this is a way to kind of keep your flags in the ground, I suppose, of the land that you claim for your Finna. So there's that. Now, the real reason, though, that Ulster was depopulated was because it actually was. So if you think back to some of the episodes, I better repeat in case some of our listeners haven't heard our Conquest series, but there's a few moments in the 16th century where there are these mass famines in Ulster caused by the scorching the earth tactics of the colonists. So these colonists would come in and kind of arrange mass crop burnings, slaughtering of all the farm animals, destruction of all the buildings to kind of set up a scenario of starvation, of community starvation. And these famines kind of had a knock-on effect. When you had starvation, you got disease. When you had disease, the economy fell apart. When the economy fell apart, of course, you have more famine. So you got these tens and tens and tens of thousands of people dying all at once, maybe in 1 year, during these kind of artificial famines that were set up during the conquest. And some of the worst ones were in Ulster. But then we have this hammer blow after the defeat at Kinsale. So after the defeat of Kinsale, Elizabeth's remaining forces, I'm trying to get my kings and queens right, they pretty much pressed the red button for the complete and utter annihilation of Gaelic Ulster in any way that they possibly could. So roving around Ulster, really kind of killing everything that they could, or making sure that nothing really could survive in the area. And that was to make sure that the great O'Neill, who we talked about, this great rebel against the settling of Ireland by the colonists at that point, could never really come back at them again. So it's only a few years after that, it's only a few years after the defeat at Kinsale, after the flight of the Earls, that the plantation begins. And that means that the plantation was coming into a place that had been scorched and depopulated very rapidly, very suddenly, a huge drop in population and a huge kind of fleeing from the landscape as well. So in that sense, they were coming into a place that had been very much kind of physically emptied out. So there's both perceptions happening, right? So the perception of literally seeing a place where a lot of people have died, like a huge proportion of the population have died, and a perception of seeing a place where the people who are still there, the people who are still functioning within a Gaelic economy, aren't considered to be using the land in any important way. They were here yesterday, but they seem to be gone now. So I suppose we could start growing corn now, So that was the way people saw it. So that's about an answer to your question. For further studies on this, there's a great book that I might mention. There's a book called Gaelic Ulster in the Middle Ages by Catherine Sims, who was a former lecturer in medieval history at Trinity College in Dublin. And that goes all the way through the Middle Ages right up to the conquest. So it really covers all of that in a very in-depth way. So if anyone's interested in Ulster and Gaelic Ulster in particular, which is such an interesting subject, that's something that you might be interested in.
It's so curious how frequently that issue comes up in history about just the lack of recognition for other models of land ownership or land usage, rights to the land, I suppose. It's coming out in all sorts of different scenarios, including in Canada, and a case I was reading about recently.
No, you can't just drop that bomb. What do you mean, including in Canada?
Oh gosh, I was just reading a little bit about the Klondike Gold Rush. So there was around the turn of the last century, a Seattle newspaper published that there were boats in the harbour that were going to go to Klondike because people had been discovering nuggets of gold. And it's spurred this craze and mass rush to this area of Canada. But this was Yukon territory, so it was actually, you know, it was the land of native people called the Yukon people, and all of these outsiders came in. It was a huge kind of physical ordeal to get there because it was really remote. You had to bring all of your stuff and a load of water and things, and but what they did when they arrived was they literally stripped the earth bare. So they were cutting down all the woods and things for firewood, but also they were literally digging into the earth because they were trying to find gold. And it actually removed just the top layer of vegetation and soil from this sort of like earthly paradise of untouched nature and forests and rivers and stuff. You just get an apocalyptic scene. It looks like the trenches of World War I. It's just mud and people scrambling around in the mud and just like bare earth. And what happens then, of course, is, okay, so there's total collapse of the ecosystem. The trees are gone. The animals have nowhere to survive. The animals are being killed for meat and also for eating. Then the rains come, and because there's no big sponges, forests to absorb them, they just run off. There's massive mudslides and collapses. That all goes into the river. The rivers, then all the fish populations die off. God. So all of this land that the Yukon people had been living on for thousands of years, you know, fishing, hunting, living in this way, which was allowing, you know, the nature to continue. It just collapses over the course of about 2 years. Wow. They starve en masse, and also because of the contact, many die from disease. And they are moved into this tiny reservation. So they're not even kind of using all of that land anymore because it's being given to prospectors. I've struggled to find out exactly what the legal situation was regarding property ownership and if there was a kind of like racial, quote unquote, distinction between whether these incomers could own property and like the local people couldn't or something like that. But as far as I can tell, there's this imbalance anyway. And so they're not really part of this gold rush. They're like this, like victims of it. And it's so terrible because I'm sure you'd heard of the Klondike, right? Yeah, like everyone, it's quite well known, but it's kind of referred to as this fun, nostalgic thing, you know, with like people panning for gold and it's like kind of cutesy stuff and wholesome. And it's like, it's not. It's such a, like, it's an ecological disaster and also just like a humanitarian catastrophe for the Yukon people, and it's such a colonial event, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, right. That's what I was reading about. I read a research paper about it. That's why I was thinking about the different conceptions of ownership.
Yeah, like it's important. Yeah, and also, I mean, we have this parallel as well of depopulation in the Americas. So when we're thinking about Ulster as a depopulated terrain, in preparation for plantation, it's very similar to what was the situation in North America at the same time, being a depopulated terrain, of course, by things like this, you know, like things like this, and of course, biological warfare, basically, that have been introduced with European diseases, kind of more or less depopulating the entire continent by something up to 90%. So a lot of the colonial projects are built around this idea, of course, of settling a depopulated terrain. And if you don't have a depopulated terrain to start with, does seem to be a point where they say, okay, we need to depopulate this terrain then, right? It makes the big differences between these two kind of models of colonialism, of settler colonialism and extraction colonialism, because we have places like Australia, for instance, right? So places like Australia where you, through disease, through massacre, through the ways that you are settling this place, you clear the land of the people who were living there. And then you have places like India, for instance, where there's just no logistical way that you can do that. There's too many people, right? There's too many people to do this. And you don't have the weapon of disease, right? So in the old world, you just don't have this weapon of disease. So you can't do the same thing.
Right, because they've been exposed to the same pathogens already.
Exactly.
So it's not like
for
helping the
years.
colonizers. Right. And I imagine, like India, I haven't read that much about Indian history, but from what I do know of it, I think, you know, there were very powerful rival forces in India as well. So I imagine you have more patterns of, you know, armed resistance and things like that as well. You know, it's kind of like, it's a less naive, could I say, society? Is that like rude or racist to say?
No,
I hope not.
I don't think so. I think, just knowing what the concepts of property that Europeans have in their minds, like that in itself is just a big leg up, right? Because if you're going to the new world, the people that you're encountering, a lot of them are just kind of going to have to figure this out while you are literally telling them falsehoods about it, while you're misleading them.
Right.
So of course, knowing Europeans and knowing what they're up to and what they want is a huge advantage, of course, like above that. But disease is probably the biggest one. And you can actually see this in Ireland if you bring this to Ireland. So let's say if we kind of go up to the 17th century and we have an Ireland that has been planted, the depopulation of Ulster through scorching the earth had to be done artificially. It couldn't be done through disease, so it was done through basically killing people, through genocide, as much as possible, trying to kill as many people as possible, which is actually quite difficult to do. And that's what we can see happening in Ireland, so that in Ulster, where it manages to take place, or where there is a kind of a really lasting effect of that, and then plantation immediately afterwards taking advantage of it, we see a settler colony. So we have a settler colony developing in the north part of the island of Ireland. But in the rest of Ireland, it's like India. There's too many people, and there's no way to have a successful settler colony, and they're not dying of disease, and you can't put them all to the sword, and it's very hard to kill them all through scorching the earth, no matter how you might try. So you end up with an extraction colony, right? So it's like Australia to the north and India to the south in Ireland. There's just two models of colonization happening at the same time. It's quite interesting.
That is interesting. Gosh, what a way of putting it.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay.
Anyway.
Well, look, we strayed a little far from
We have a bit. Klondike?
That was all very interesting.
Okay, I've got one for you.
Okay, so where to next?
Yeah, I've got
You've
one for you.
me.
Okay. So Kitty May asks, whatever happened with the referendum to allow non-resident citizens to vote for president? Yes, good question. Kitty May, tell us about this, Naomi.
This is my little pet subject at one point, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. This has been going on for ages, actually, this debate. In general, I am favour expanding the franchise. I think it's artificially constricted, but I've talked about that separately. I won't go over it again. So whatever happened to this referendum? This is a referendum that would change voting rights in Ireland for the president. Okay, so we're not talking about general elections. We're not talking about referenda. We're not talking about anything like that. This is strictly just for the election of the president. And the idea would be to extend who's allowed to vote in that to any Irish citizen, regardless of whether they're resident within the Republic or not. So de facto, that would mean Irish citizens in the north. It would also mean Irish citizens outside of the island who are resident somewhere else. Okay. Why did this idea come up? It's because in 2013 there was a constitutional convention, so basically a review of the constitution, and people put their heads together and thought this was a good idea. So they recommended this change in the 2013 Constitutional Convention. The government is supposed to follow recommendations like that, and it has many of them. Equal marriage and so on came out of recommendations like that. So duly, in 2017, the government said a referendum would be held, and legislation was brought forward that would have paved the way to do that in 2019. But that didn't happen in the life cycle of that particular government. So then there were elections in early 2020. New government took power, and almost immediately is dealing with COVID. So that kind of pushes everything else off the table for a little while, I think. The legislation doesn't get reintroduced. It needs to be reintroduced now because it lapsed in the last life cycle. And then what happened is we had in 2024 two referendums that failed. So the government got a big punch in the nose when they held two other referendums. This, just to remind listeners, that one referendum was about removing the reference in our constitution to a woman's duties in the home, kind of 1930s traditional conception about gender roles, and would have inserted a sentence that recognised the role of care or carers. Both of these were rejected, and the government was, sore about it. There had been quite broad political consensus about these two changes, but nevertheless didn't matter. Public rejected it. It was seen as like a blow to the government. They're licking their wounds. Now, since then, Sinn Féin in particular is really pushing for this referendum on presidential voting to be held. Labour as well has been calling for it, saying to the government, where's the legislation? When are we going ahead with this? Interestingly enough, it was actually discussed in the Stormont Assembly in the north, and they recommended it go ahead as well earlier this year. So the government is being urged to do this. Why are they not doing it? It seems that they're afraid they're going to lose. They're afraid that they're going to have a repeat of the last two referendums, and that they won't win. So they are being risk averse, and they're afraid to put it out there. There was Neil Richmond, a Fine Gael guy, was talking about this during the summer, and he said there's a lot of kind of misinformation about it or misunderstanding. And to be honest, I kind of know what he means, because I did talk about this a little bit when it was sort of first brought up around 2017, 2018. Yeah. And there's a lot of scaremongering, and people suddenly take this really expansionist version of what's being proposed. So people often immediately think that this is going to be general elections. It's going to be everything. It's going to, it's going to be all kinds of elections. And then people start mentioning how many people around the world claim Irish heritage, which is a really massive number. Like famously in the United States, there's like, I don't know how many tens of millions of people claim some kind of Irish heritage. And then this is conflated with the amount of people that it's thought would be added to the electorate. So it's thought, people start thinking, what if we have tens of millions of people, there's going to be more people added to the electorate than there currently exists, which it's not the case. It's actually the number of Irish citizens is much, much smaller than people that claim some kind of ancestral lineage. It's a much smaller number, but you really quickly, I can't remember how many it is, but it might be like 350,000 or something like that. Anyway, I need to rehearse that, because that's like quite an old figure I just have knocking around in my head. But anyway, really quickly, the argument gets sidetracked into then laws around who can get Irish citizenship through a grandparent, and it all gets really contentious, and then it's about who's really Irish and who has a claim, to be involved in the politics, and people start talking about, do people have a right to a vote if they're not paying taxes here, and it all gets really contentious and confusing. So yeah, that I imagine that's what they're concerned about. That's why it's been put on the long finger.
Yeah, and I suppose for anything like this as well, people are happy with what they have, what they know.
Yeah.
And it's a funny one, because the only people, I suppose, who can vote for this in a referendum are the people who already have that privilege of being able to vote because they're resident in Ireland. So they're not the ones that are going to benefit from it directly, the ones who are voting in the referendum about it.
And the politicians, they don't have a constituency, which is, going to give them votes out of this, because these people by definition can't vote for them, so the people who will be granted votes. And then also there's this concern about overseas influence of Irish politics. There was this stuff coming from the US about pushing Conor McGregor for president, and a certain amount of people are really afraid that it would kind of change the character of Irish elections, and you'd have overseas influence and all this kind of stuff. And I have all these counter arguments to this, which I won't get into, but anyway, I think it's really it's quite disappointing, particularly for Irish citizens in the North. Like, what the hell? Why can't Irish citizens in the North vote for president? Like, that just doesn't make sense. Right.
Yes, indeed. Listeners, actually, I might be interested in the episode. I've just remembered the name of it. It was an episode, I think, from 2017, actually, about that. It was called Why Can't All Irish People Vote? Or Why Can't Everyone in Ireland Vote?
Oh, wow.
Yes. That has just come back to me.
Yeah,
so if you're new to the podcast, and if you would be interested in finding out all of those details that Naomi is just mentioning briefly there, you can go and listen to that. I think it's more or less, like you said, it hasn't changed since then, because there hasn't been any movement on this since then, even though, of course, the world has changed entirely since that moment. But you can go back and check that in your feed.
A different time, definitely. All right, Tim, I have... Oh, okay. One of your favourite topics.
Okay. Oh, good.
Townland.
Oh, yes. yes.
Okay, we have this question from Anonymous. Tim, I have heard you mention townlands. I see that my neighbours are a townland. I guess what? Neighbours are a townland?
Yes, I'll explain this. Yeah. Go on.
Okay, I looked it up and was surprised. It's an ancient thing. Thoughts?
Yes. Okay, right. So, first of all, yes, the listener says that I see my neighbours are a townland. I think this might be because the listener comes from the north. And in the north, townlands aren't such a thing officially as they are in the south. And that is because in 1972, Royal Mail in Northern Ireland decided that they were going to take them off official addresses. So people in...
Oh my God, I'm so annoyed about that.
Well, you're not the only one. People in the north were really annoyed as well, on both sides of the community. Everyone was a bit annoyed about this because, of course, everyone was attached to this name of their local community. But from Royal Mail's point of view, and I suppose this was probably coming from a kind of centralised source in London, it just was baffling. They didn't really understand why. What's this about? Why don't you have road names and street numbers? You know, and that's what they did. And they put it through anyway. So even though they had huge pushback against it, they put road names and street numbers all over Northern Ireland on postal addresses. So a lot of townlands just, I mean, they're still there. People still use them, but a lot of them have kind of disappeared and they're not on street signs or anything anymore. So you don't get like a little block of stone near the road saying that you're in the townland of this or that necessarily.
What fucking like anonymous Napoleon in the Royal Mail like came up with this idea?
I know, yeah.
Honestly.
I mean, well, look at the date now as well. It was 1972.
Right.
So it's possible that they were trying to be a bit balchy and put their foot down, you know, at that point, like right at the kind of outbreak of big violence in the north. So yeah, you can imagine that it had probably had a bit of a sectarian edge to it. But I mean, like I say, both sides of the community protested against it.
It's just very ignorant. I mean, I hope that the townland names themselves are preserved because they contain a lot of information in themselves. They're vital for research purposes as well. Like if you can track what's happened in a particular town, like that's how things would have been recorded over a long period of history.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is, we're going to get into that. I'm sorry if I'm assuming, by the way, listener, I don't know if that's what you meant in your message, but I thought maybe it might be. But that is the case anyway. And yes, Naomi, like you say, like these place names have a huge amount of history. Now, we better say exactly what they are in case we have listeners who didn't hear our last episode, because they did come up in our last episode about the economic war. We talked a little bit about townlands. And basically, these are local names for very, very, very small areas. So usually, I think it is on average, they are 1.5 kilometers squared, a townland. Right. So we're talking about a few fields, a few houses, that's it, right? And they are going to have a name. And this is actually how, until we did get postcodes in the 26 counties, we got postcodes recently enough, but it took a while. When did the air codes come in? Was that
air codes,
2019 or something?
I was actually kind of resistant to them because I was like just attached to the traditional way of doing things, but it can't be denied that they are very handy.
They're very handy
because the air code corresponds to a particular property. Yeah. So in general, they work pretty well. Yeah. Although randomly, I won't say who now, but this is very strange. My parents' house, there's some sort of air code confusion in Google Maps where if you put our air code into Google Maps, it brings you slightly wrong. And the result is that we get loads of posts and deliveries intended for one of Ireland's most famous actors. Oh. So we're constantly operating as a kind of concierge service for this guy. I won't say who it is. Okay, they were brought in 2015.
You know what you need, Naomi, is a kettle and a good strong light and just to be able to see, just get a little glimpse of maybe what's going on in those envelopes. So listen, I'll walk you through it.
No, my dad is on it. My dad is on it. Like he's like, oh, give it to me here. Like he takes it off the postman, has a little look. You know, one time he managed to figure out what book was being delivered from Amazon, and then he shared this, you know, very valuable information with me. You know, like, do you think he's working on a film about it? You know, it's just kind of stuff.
Jeez, I hope he's not listening. Well, he should probably sort out his post if he is. But yes, indeed. I mean,
if it prompts a change, I'd be grateful because it's annoying. Like we get so many taxis and fucking pizza deliveries and stuff.
Oh my God.
Like the bell going all hours of the night.
That is annoying. That is actually very annoying. Yeah. I'm sure that will be fixed eventually. I suppose it doesn't affect him, so he probably doesn't even realize the extent of it. But
probably doesn't even know. He just thinks he lives in wonderful privacy.
Yeah, where people kind of bring him a pizza from next door every now and again. But the air code, yes, that's how it functions. So theoretically, I suppose you could just write an air code on an envelope and it should get to the exact house that you're going to. It's a 5-digit code or something.
We probably don't have to explain the concept
of a postcode.
Postcodes is probably only novel to us.
Well, I mean, it's not the same in all countries. Like, you don't have postcodes like this in France. You have to put the full address in France. But I think
you just have an area code, right?
You just have an area code, yeah, exactly. Like you have, like they had in Dublin since forever, like Dublin 2, Dublin 3, Dublin 4. That's all you have in France as well.
Yeah.
But I think the postcodes in the UK work similar to this anyway as well. They kind of identify a specific
I think
property.
they're quite precise. Yeah, I think they are.
Anyway,
we
got those.
Where did we start?
I do.
What were we doing?
No, I know.
Right.
It's okay. We're both tired at the end of the year, and you've got the flu, Naomi, so we can give ourselves a bit of space to go off on our tangents. So before these air codes came in a few years ago, what the post person did is that they would get an address that said Tim McInerney, my townland, County Galway, right? And then they would go to my townland and they would look around and just kind of see, is that the McInerney house? Is that the McInerney house? And if they didn't know where the McInerney house was, they'd go to someone else's house and say, where do the McInerneys live? And they'd say, oh, you have to go behind the rock and down the bog and etc. You know, they'd give you quite detailed directions. And you go. And eventually your postman just gets to know you. And that's just how, that's how the whole system worked. But I do remember I had a Canadian visitor a few years ago and she asked for my address for some reason. And she said, where's the postcode? And I said, oh, there is none. And she said, how does the post get to you? And I said, the postman knows me. And she thought it was the most charming thing. That the postman just knows everyone, right? Anyway, that's how it worked. Now, the thing is, go on, sorry.
I have a tip for anyone, okay? Yeah. If you find yourself in a similar dilemma, but you're not a postman, okay? Yeah. And you need to find someone and you know pretty much, you know what parish they live in. Okay, this is how it worked for me. See if the parish has a local newsletter, and on the newsletter will be the number of the local priest, and then you can WhatsApp the priest and say you're trying to get a hold of this person.
No way.
And it works within a couple of hours. This happened to me last month.
It works within a couple of hours, like life hack. The priest responds, I think you mean.
Yeah. Well, the priest got back to me and was like, well, I'm not sharing any details of any parishioners, but I'll pass on your request. And then lo and behold, I got a call very quickly.
Speaking of concierge service, geez, I hope it wasn't too late at night, the poor priest. Right. Well, this is, I suppose, it's symptomatic of how this whole system worked. And like sometimes you would see on an envelope, like Tim McInerney past the third big rock, townland. That you'd write that on an envelope sometimes, like, or near the pink house or something like that, right?
Yes. Yeah. My uncle had opposite the golf course on his address.
It was.
I think it was like big house opposite the golf course or something, County Wicklow.
It was, yeah. It was pretty wonderful. And I suppose you still see them every now and again. Also, addresses were really long, I noticed. Like, because there was no postcode, sometimes you had to be quite descriptive. Yeah. So remember, I had to send, for some official document or something, I had to get some official document of mine in Ireland. I had to contact the Gardaí, like the Gardaí head office in I think they're in Kildare, are they? Or Tipperary or something. Anyway, it was like Gardaí head office, Tipperary House,
it's like Turles,
5 Tipperary Road, Tipperary Hill, County Tipperary, Ireland, or something. It was just went on forever. And it all said more or less the same thing. I mean, I'm sure if I just said Garda head office, Ireland, it would have got there. But anyway.
I think this is a lost skill set. I mean, look, the air codes did drag us into the 21st century, but at the same time, like, there's something nice about, the skill of a postman who's able to bring the correct letter to someone if you just write on it, like the guy who plays the violin, who lives by the bridge in Galway or whatever, which I think is pretty close to an actual example. Yeah,
it is. And I mean, honestly, like, things didn't get lost because if the postman knows who you are, there was no kind of anonymous dropping letters into letterboxes because it said the wrong thing. It was like, oh no, they actually mean Mary up the road. Like, the postman would know that. So, so anyway, sorry, wow. Let us try and keep to the subject at hand. The reason that was able to work was because of the townlands in Ireland, right? So, now townland is this very ambiguous word, like we mentioned briefly in our last episode. So I actually know why it's called townland. now because I did a little bit of digging for our listener. And it comes from the Irish Baile Farran. And that means literally home territory. So now, well, yeah, okay. So we have to kind of break down these two words, really. The word baile in Irish is actually quite an ambiguous word. So it gets attached to towns, and everyone will know it. Like, for instance, the Irish for Dublin is Ballyoclia, right?
Ballyoclia,
Right, so
the most
whatever.
famous one.
Or like
Anywhere called Bally anything, the Irish is Ballia. It's coming from Ballia.
It's coming from Baile, usually. Yeah, exactly. Or like Ballyglass will be a Ballyglass, which is green town, right? Quote unquote.
Yeah.
But I mean, you would translate it as town, I suppose, is the best way to put it. But Baile doesn't actually mean town. So this is a word that comes from pre-colonial Ireland when there weren't towns in the Gaelic world anyway. There were Norman towns and Viking towns, but few and far between relatively. And Baile actually, it also does mean home. So when you say you're going home, you use the word Awalia. Yeah, exactly.
I never realised.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
So
my God.
Baile means your home. And it also means town. And I suppose the most approximate term I could think of is like homestead is what it means, right? So it doesn't actually really mean a town. It means a place that is, I suppose, settled. But have you ever heard people, Naomi, refer to the home place when they're talking about their like parents' house or their grandparents' house?
I guess.
You know, you hear people saying that. You know, back at the home place, or where's your home place? People use that word.
Yeah.
And what they mean is like the ancestral home, right? Like the house where all the family and brothers and sisters grew up. And at a time when you have lots of brothers and sisters, that kind of makes sense, right? Like you have the nucleus of this very big family who have lots of homes now. So it occurred to me that the home place is a direct translation of Baile Farran, really, like home territory. Like that's really what it means, right? Home territory. But if you didn't know Irish and you were trying to translate it, you would translate it as town land. Right? I'm just guessing because Baile can mean town, and this Farran does mean land.
It's just a poor translation, right? Yeah. So it's might be more correctly translated as the home place. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, right. So I just thought that was interesting. So
that is interesting. That's a good theory.
Yes. Well, yeah. We'll see. I'm open to corrections, listeners, if you have any corrections on that one. Now, the original Ordnance Survey map, which was taken, I think it's 1842, so that's the great kind of mapping of Ireland and the changing of all the names into anglicised names, that recorded 60,000 Baile Farran, so 60,000 townlands. And they didn't change. So there was another great mapping, I think, in 1901, and there was like 60,002 or something like that. So they're very kind of stable on the landscape. Now, these places go all the way back to Gaelic Ireland, like I said. So the listener was right, they are ancient. And they weren't actually describing settlements. So we said in our last episode, we noted that there's lots of townlands where there's no houses. It's just a few fields that has a name, and it's like known as a townland. It might be possible that there were never any houses there because the names or the townlands themselves exist as a way in Gaelic Ireland to map the countryside. So basically, the entire countryside is divided into units of townlands, and each townland unit is linked with a prominent feature of it. And that feature might be a settlement. So you might have something like Ballygown, for instance, so Balliangown, which means like the home of the smith. So that's just the place where the smith lives. But the whole area becomes the place where the smith lives. Kind of like a street name, I suppose we have today, like Market Street, you know?
Right.
Or you might just have a geographical description. So, for instance, like Anach. Anach means marsh. So Anahide or something like that, you know, like the marsh of this, the marsh of that. Or Powell, that's another one you get a lot. So Powell means a hole or a hollow, or Slieve, which means hillside, or Dura, which means oak grove. So these names describe places rather than settlements. And it's a way to know what's in the landscape around you. Now, this is the piece that I was saying actually links up to that idea of Ulster being depopulated in like the colonial imagination. Like it couldn't be anywhere less depopulated in the sense that the people who did use that land had literally named every hill and tree, you know, like every few fields had a name, had been kind of mapped in the Gaelic mind, and were
called the Swampy Place,
Swampy
or
Place.
the Forest of the Oaks, like Derry or whatever.
Yes, exactly. And like when we say Forest of the Oak, this kind of gives you an idea of like a forest that we have now. This could be really just a few trees, you know, like these are really specific little tiny places, like the edge of the stream or the mouth of the this or whatever. And it was a way for people in Gaelic Ireland to know basically the economic significance of these places. So you'll have places that like reference the fertility of the land or the not fertility of the land is like a big one. So you'll have kind of like the empty fields or the bald hills or things like that. That's like a very common one. Or you'll have things that are like reference literally what the land is good for. So one of my favourite place names in Ireland is Clonmel, which means the Valley of Honey. And like in English it sounds kind of trite, like Honey Valley, you know, but this literally meant the valley where there was actually honey being made there, you know, or being collected. So there, you know, it's describing a real thing, you know, like it's really beautiful. So it's a kind of economic necessity. Like it's very similar, I think, to the way how urban societies in the rest of Europe were naming their streets, like I said earlier, like Market Street or Church Street or whatever. This just kind of really identifying the landscape in a very intimate way. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. According to the kind of needs and the interests of like this very land-based society and, you know, livestock-based society as well.
Yes.
Where is the good grass and where is the water and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
Something I've noticed actually, now this kind of clicks into place now that you say that possibly a better translation is something like home place, because I just thought this was cute and funny, but my relatives in Kerry, when they call each other, they refer to the townland. They don't say the person they're going to call. They refer to the townland.
Oh, right.
So let's say, I don't want to say their actual townlands because it's too specific, but let me say it's called Lisbeg or something.
Yeah.
Okay? So they'll say like, I'll call Lisbeg, or like, who was calling there? It was Lisbeg. That's who they say it was. And it's like they're referring to each other as like seats of power, because it doesn't refer to any single person. It's, you know, it's the fortress of Lisbeg, you know, which is the person who lives in that house there or whatever, which is a whole group of 8 people or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a bit like, you know, get Paris on the line, you know. It's anyway, I've always found it really evocative, you know, because you get this idea of this house as a kind of force, of social force, you know. Anyway.
Yeah. It is interesting, yeah, because like...
Have you noticed that? Does anyone you know do that?
I suppose so. I haven't ever kind of clocked it, but yeah, I can imagine it, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And very often in the townlands there is kind of a cluster of houses, very much a homestead, if you will. So where you have a kind of a main farm that has mushroomed off into like the son or the daughter at some stage, built a house nearby. So there's a cluster of like a few little dwellings on a corner of a road or something. And very often now, like all the other dwellings are farm outhouses, and one of them is a farmhouse, usually now. But only just before the 1950s, you would have seen all of like lots of different families living in all those little houses. These little, there's Lisbeg, you know, that's the community unit that is Lisbeg, you know,
Yeah.
Awesome. Something super interesting that kind of shows you how Balia, you know, just does not fit with town as well. And that gives you such an insight into this Gaelic world is that in the north, they don't say townland as much. They do say townland, but there's another word that's used in the north and in south of the border as well in Ulster. They say ballybow, a ballybow. Have you ever heard that?
Oh, never.
No, either have I. No, yeah. It's a ballybow, and it comes from Ballybow, a cow town or a cow place.
Yeah. A cow place.
So that cow place over there has oak trees. That cow place over there has a river. That cow place over there has a blacksmith. You know, that's, again, if you think about Ulster as this nomadic place.
It's an entirely cow-based worldview.
Yeah, this is like we're passing through this cow place that has like a place where the cows can rest, when we're passing through this cow's place where the cows can drink, you know, and where there's honey in this one, like yay, right? So indeed, that is, I think, is that it? Do I have anything else to say about townlands?
I will just say that this all makes perfect sense to me because I was very lucky to travel to Arctic Sweden a couple of years ago. And when I was in Arctic Sweden, I did an interview with a representative of the local Sami people, one of the Sami groups. There's like a bunch of different Sami groups up there. And he was like one of the community representatives of one of them. And I wanted to ask him about the potential impact of plans to extend a mine nearby on their way of life, because they are still reindeer herders. That's how they make their living. They move around during the year. They go up into the uplands during the summer, and then they come down into the more sheltered forests during the winter. And the reindeer eat the moss and lichen off the trees.
Wow.
And survive. And all of this, the changes to the landscape that climate change is bringing, is like extremely disruptive to this way of life, because it's entirely based on, where is the soft snow that, if the snow is too hard, the reindeers can't get underneath it to get their food and stuff. All these kind of little details that only become extremely urgent when you're literally living off the land, and this is kind of life and death for your animals. So anyway, I spoke to him, and one of the most amazing things to see was, in his office, he had a huge, long map up on the wall. And it was all color coded, and it was written in a language I didn't understand. But I was like, what is this showing? And he was like, okay, all the color codes are different places for different phases of the reindeer life cycle. So he was like, all this orange, like, let's say this orange bit here, this is the reindeer nursing grounds. This is where they have their children, the reindeer calving.
Yeah.
And then this is the good grazing land during the summer, and then here's where the water is, where we stop when we make our crossing, and here's the forest. And he explained it to me, and it explained totally like the course of their annual cycle, why they were moving up. And it's always been difficult for them because they actually cross borders. They go up into Norway. They're not always strictly within Sweden, so stuff like taxation and stuff has always been kind of complicated for them, and this kind of intrusion of the state. Anyway, that it's the same thing, right? It's the same thing. It's based on the natural resources that your animals are going to need, that you're living off. So yeah, I totally understand that their town lands would be called those things.
Yeah,
that's how they would know them by.
That's so fast, and so such a good analogy, actually. Yeah, but interesting. What a privilege to be able to go and talk to that community and like be just told one-on-one how it works. Wow. I know. It's one of the best. Like, that is why my job is like got to be one of the best in the world, because you can just be like, I want to understand this thing. Can you tell me about it? And you could try asking that to pretty much everyone in the world, and someone, a certain amount of them is going to say yes. Right, yeah, certain amount, yeah. Okay, all right. Speaking of people who would like to know things, we have a question for you, Naomi. This is from Maureen. So okay. Maureen asks, Maureen says that she would love to see a future episode on the origins and eventual abolition of the marriage ban, 1973. Oh. Wow, what a good question. And we really should make an episode on this, actually, because that says a lot of meat to get into. It's a huge question, and one of the main reasons why we should make an episode about it is because we are one of the few countries where people who were affected by the marriage ban are still alive. Right, yeah. Older women will have actually lived through this. Yeah. Better say what it is, I suppose, first of all. Better say what it is. Yeah, so... okay, so... Yeah, go on. Marriage bar, do you want to describe it? It was the civil service, right, mainly, that was concerned, as far as I understand. The civil service is where it was legally inscribed. I see. So, by law, in the civil service, you had to submit your resignation as a woman when you got married. That you could not continue. That was the civil service, but beyond the civil service, in all other jobs, like throughout the economy, it reigned informally as the absolute norm. It was just normal. So it wasn't enforced by a law, but it was almost universally observed. Right. Anyway. So if you were a professional woman, didn't matter how many years of training, qualifications you had, the day that you got married was your last day of work, normally. It's retirement day, pretty much, yeah. Bye. That was it, and off you go to the kitchen, and that's your life from now on. Now, as far as I understand it as well, the justification for this, the official justification, was that women working were taking the job of another family, so that two jobs would basically be going to one family when you could have two jobs going to two families, so that it was, it was trying to spread the scarcity of jobs around. I know that was the official justification at the time, and of course, we're talking about 1973. When men being the breadwinners of the house was, I suppose, still the absolute norm outside Ireland too. So I can sketch it out a little bit. Yeah. Yes, I mean that was the conception of the household, that you would have a single breadwinner and another person, the woman, running the household, and that the breadwinner, you shouldn't have like two breadwinners in one house hoarding jobs.
But yes, that was part of conception. It was part of the, Catholic vision of life, and it was pretty much not universally, but it was. I mean, it had public support. There wasn't much questioning of it. It comes out of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so in the Industrial Revolution, it's a time when you have women working outside of the home in increasing numbers. Women would always have worked in history. They would have been farmers. Women would have been weaving, making clothes, doing all sorts of industries in the house. You didn't have this model where you go to some other place to do a job as much. Even if you were, say, a servant or something, you would be based in a home, right? Mm-hmm. So in the Industrial Revolution, you suddenly have the creation of these new spaces, working spaces, factories and so on. And the appearance of women, also children in them, it was like a new development. And for some people, they saw it as a challenge or like moral questions. There were lots of concerns about working in certain settings affecting women's fertility. Mm-hmm. So factories, for example, there was concern that the women might not be able to have children. They had some funny ideas about what affected fertility. But, given the conditions in some of the factories, maybe some of them were right. And then also... pregnant women working and being seen around was seen as a little bit morally challenging. That's kind of an idea that persisted for decades. But yeah, in times of unemployment, when jobs were a commodity that not everybody had and that were sought after, it was an employment protection policy for men, and it became very common in many countries around the world. So it wasn't just Ireland that had these. It became very common. Then, like, one of the major things that happened is World War I. In World War I, in Europe, men en masse were fighting at the front, and women were explicitly encouraged and asked as part of policy to work in men's jobs. And part of the deal was they promised, to go back afterwards so that men could go back into their jobs. In some countries this happened more than in others, but it had it did have some effects on society, that having been the case. So in the early 1920s in Ireland, the early years of the state, it was formalised in law, the law within the civil service, and beyond the civil service, the informal norm. It was extended to teachers in the 1930s. It was also accompanied by various financial incentives. So married men got a higher rate of pay. And also when you left the civil service as a woman, you got like a bonus, kind of. They gave you money, which was really attractive. It was a bit like a wedding dowry almost,
Right.
And that was, people didn't feel like they could kind of turn that down. That's how things were for decades. And people more or less just kind of accepted it. In many parts of Europe, it started to be abolished, I think, in the 1940s in Britain and the Netherlands. In 1946, when it ended in Britain, it wasn't ended in local government and the civil service in the north. So in the north, they kept it. And it continued around. The kind of unusual thing about Ireland is just how long it persevered. Like, it went on until 1973. The reason why they got rid of it in 1973 isn't because of like a feminist revolution or some wave of campaigning. It's because Ireland needed to get rid of it in order to join the antecedent of the European Union, the European Economic Community. So it was a necessary thing as part of Ireland's accession to the EEC. That's also in the early 1970s. So it was ended in 1973. That was within the civil service, so the bit that was inscribed in law was ended then. And then the informal iteration of it, which was pervasive throughout society and all kinds of other jobs, was explicitly outlawed under EU laws in 1977.
1977.
So that's the change. Yeah. So, but like the ideas behind this persisted for a really long time. Like I was talking to my mum about this the other day. And when she was pregnant in the 1980s, she'd gone over to London to work, and she had a job over in London. She was pregnant with her first baby, and she just quit her job because she didn't know about maternity leave. She didn't know that existed. She just thought that's what happens. You just quit. So she never inquired about getting any kind of maternity pay or maternity leave or coming back or going part-time. None of this occurred to her because it was just still the norm for her that you stopped working then. So she just didn't get any of these things. This only came up because, like, when I had my baby, I was talking about leave and stuff, and she was like, I wonder if my workplace had those things then. I just never asked, you know? It just didn't occur to her.
It is crazy. I have a similar story, actually. My aunt mentioned this recently, how my aunt and my mother were more or less the same age. They were the first generation of women, almost exactly on the cusp there. So they would have been about 23 at the time that this came in. And so they would have been getting married at about 25 in those days. And when my aunt had her first baby, she was a teacher. She was a teacher in a school. And she said, okay, so I'm going to need maternity leave. And the board of the school and the whole organizer said, oh, right. We've never done this before. Like, there was no precedent.
Yeah.
They didn't know how.
Yeah.
And that was the state education system didn't know how to, like, give her maternity leave because they just had never done it before, which is absolutely wild to think about.
Wait till you hear this, Tim. I mean, these things resonate over the generations. I mean, there's lots of talk about the effect of this. One effect is that many people going into retirement, women, have hardly any pension because they don't have enough years of contribution to get a state pension because they were forced to retire at whatever age they got married, right? So this is a huge kind of structural issue with the pension system in Ireland with loads of social effects. It means you're still dependent on your husband now in 2025.
Wow.
Even if, you know, this was something that was ended in 1973. Say you want to leave the marriage. You don't have your own pension. You don't have state pension because of this marriage bar. So this is one of the very, very long tails of this, which are many. Also, there's this question about, you know, the very low level of women in senior policy making roles that persists in the civil service. We don't really know how much of that would have been different if there hadn't been a marriage bar which got rid of women. Maybe you would have had more examples of women that people could have followed. But this is, so it resonates down the generation. So, like, okay, another example. So my grandmother obviously would have fallen under this. So she had no career. She wanted to be a journalist, but she once she got married and had kids, it wasn't a question anymore. Like that dream was over. My mom wanted to be a pilot. She went along. She did the pilot exam. She got like some incredibly high score, and they were like, "Wow, your exam score is really spectacular. We rarely get someone like that, or we've never had it, or something." But you know, you're a young woman. Don't you think you'll have other priorities? Don't you want to get married and have kids and stuff? And they were like, maybe you should come back next year. That's just to demonstrate you're serious. And she was so annoyed that she never went back. Okay, so that's the next story. Final story. It's me, okay, in 2024, and I'm going to go on maternity leave, and it turns out that a foreign correspondent has never taken maternity leave before. So it's completely unprecedented and complicated because it involves like different jurisdictions, and like, you know, where have I been paying social security, who's supposed to get the money from the state that subsidizes maternity leave programs. None of this had even been considered. Nobody thought about it. So like it raised all these questions, and like it's still kind of mind-boggling to me. Like there just aren't examples of people in my actual job having families, you know, as a woman.
Wow, that is really something else. Actually, it's we're 50 years on from the marriage ban, more than 50. Yeah. I mean, it is something that's boggling. It's those 2 decades there, the 70s and the 80s, are particularly kind of boggling when you consider things like that just somehow managed to exist that long into the 20th century in Ireland. The ban on abortion, of course, that lasted another few decades. The ban on contraception, the marriage ban, things like that. Just these incredibly draconian ways of living, and just such kind of state-endorsed misogyny, actually. Like, you know, really is something else. Which, of course, that's going to have a knock-on effect on another few decades down the line where you just don't have a female foreign correspondent for a generation or two.
Like you might have one, but you know, she's got to live the life as a man. I'm not talking about my specific employer. I'm talking about maybe the entire media industry, right? But it's not the life of a man. But your model has to be that you if you have a family and you have kids, then you have a homemaker spouse type at home to make it work. This is really, really common, like in my job and the industry that I work in, the job that I do, because that's just like, that's how it's set up. So, I mean, in a workplace, one particular workplace I worked in, you just didn't, the only people with families were guys who had like a traditional like wife type figure at home. And apart from that, people were single. So you could be a woman, but like you were single, or you were in like some really complicated relationship where the other person lived in another city or something, you know. And that's just like, it just wasn't compatible, you know, with having a family life. I have to say my current workplace is like by far the best one that I've ever worked with, and it's like normal for people to have kids in it, and they're very supportive, so I'm really happy with them. I don't want to make it out like I'm criticizing anybody.
No, indeed.
So yeah, I was just talking about trends in the general media system, but this is not unrelated to one of our other questions, Tim, because when we were talking about the referendum on extending voting to Irish citizens internationally, and the reason why the government is scared that the referendum would fail is because the referendum failed on taking the wording out of the Constitution about the woman's duties in the home.
Right, yeah.
And that is intimately tied with the marriage bar and this conception of the structure of society and family life. That was the formalization of that idea in the Constitution. And many women believed in Ireland, there's like archive recordings of women saying this, they believed that it was something to do with the Constitution, that they had to leave their jobs for that reason, that there was something in the Constitution to do with it. That's what they thought. The two things were intimately bound up.
Wow. We do need to make an episode on this, Naomi. We shouldn't have spilt
We
all
do.
of
We
all of this
definitely do.
gold.
We gotta knock on the door of the grannies and be like, okay, like tell us,
Yeah.
you know, what was it, what happened, you know?
Yeah.
I want to know. And there were some arrangements that came in that some people were able to return at some point, like later on in the marriage ban. If they fell on financial hardship or something, then they could come back to their jobs. But they actually made it explicitly, like at one point they made it explicit that you couldn't come back and get your job even if you were widowed. So like if you became a widow, like what were you supposed to do? It's awful.
God almighty.
Anyway,
yeah.
I want to hear the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we do. Yeah, we'll have to put that on the list, Naomi, for to get around to, because that is
While
just amazing.
while the people are still around. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not that long ago. It's 1973. I think we have a little while with them yet. Now, okay. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Will we get one more in, do you think?
Okay, so Tim, here's a final question for you. And this came from Jim. He says, hey guys, you're probably getting sent this link for everybody and their brother, but do you know about the story, or have you done an episode or reporting about the Dublin grapefruit ladies who helped end apartheid in South Africa? And he sent us this clip on Instagram of a comedian going viral talking about it. Okay, so Tim, what can you tell us about this?
Yes, okay. So I'm sure that a lot of listeners have actually seen this. So it did kind of go viral a few weeks ago. This comedian David Nihill, I suppose, is his name, Nihill. And you can find him on Instagram if you want to see the clip yourself. David Nihill, I think, is his name there. It's talking about quite a famous strike in Dublin against importing foods and goods from South Africa. So let me walk you through it. It's a really, really interesting little moment. So we're in 1984 at this point. And I think it's worth, even before kind of getting into what happened with the strike, I think it's worth just kind of reminding everyone what was happening in South Africa in 1984, like what the state of the laws were under apartheid in 1984, because it's just so wild. It feels like we forget about it all the time today. You know, it just seems like such a different world, and it was just such a short time ago. So we're talking about things like population registration, which meant that your legal rights were officially determined in South Africa at this stage by the official race that was registered for you. So you didn't choose that, it was chosen for you. That would determine where you could live, where you could move, where you could work, and if you could vote. So Black South Africans couldn't vote. They were required to hold an official pass at all times. And if you didn't have your official pass and you were a Black South African, you would be arrested. And you had to stay where you lived. So you were not allowed to move further than 20 miles away from where you lived without official permission. So you're kind of living like a serf almost, you know, like under kind of indentured conditions. Now, another thing that was happening around this time was the continued project of forced relocations. So it was all based on something called the Bantu Self-Government Act of 1958. It was put in motion back then, but it kept going right up until the 1980s. And this was a mass movement of Black South Africans into official territories that had been named tribal homelands or Bantustans. And these were small, basically little islands of territory in South Africa. And the idea was to force the entire black population to live in one of these kind of separated regions. And that was, in effect, going to be putting 70% of the population into about 13% of the territory. And everything else in South Africa would be reserved for whites. And this did happen to, I think, 3.5 million people were moved over that time.
Wow.
And what happened when you were moved into one of these places is you were stripped of your citizenship. So you were no longer a citizen of South Africa. You were a citizen of one of these regions or these Bantustans. And what that meant was that if you worked in South Africa, if you wanted to work, you had to apply as a foreign worker, right? You had to get a temporary work permit to visit or work in South Africa. So you were treated basically like an immigrant in your own country. Just really unbelievable kind of architecture, I suppose, of exclusion. Now, of course, interracial marriage was banned. Interracial relationships were banned, and if you came to South Africa from another country and you were married to someone of a different race, as they determined a different race to be, it wouldn't be recognised from abroad. Huh. And of course, what we know more commonly, of course, are the separated amenities. So separate white beaches and black beaches, white restaurants, black restaurants. You couldn't have a white and a black person sitting beside each other in a cinema, for instance. You couldn't even have a black person beside you in a hospital bed. You had to be different sections of the hospital. Like, just really intense stuff. So we're really at kind of at a very intense moment in apartheid South Africa. Now, at this moment, so in July 1984, shop workers in Dunn stores on Henry Street in Dublin, two of them named Mary Manning and Karen Gearan, they were scanning, or I suppose they weren't scanning, they were probably pushing buttons, I suppose, into a till at that point, but they were ringing up different articles for customers, and one customer handed a big bag of grapefruits, and they were from South Africa. And Mary Manning, most famously, refused to ring up the grapefruits in South Africa. She said she wouldn't do it. Now, Mary and Karen were both involved in the Irish Distributive and Administrative Union, the IDATU, and this union had told its members not to handle South African goods. That was one of the stances of the union. But of course, most of its members weren't going to risk their jobs for this, right? You know, they weren't going to not ring up grapefruits. But Mary Manning took the stand. She said she wouldn't do it. Karen Gearing said the same thing. And they were both suspended by Dunn Stores. Dunn Stores said, you're suspended indefinitely. If you want to come back here and ring up South African goods, you're welcome. But as long as you refuse to do this, you're not working here basically anymore.
Wow.
So what happened then was 9 other people, so there was 11 in total, 9 other people followed them out of the store. And they effectively went on strike. And they became a staple on Henry Street, which is a big shopping street. It's like the big kind of shopping high street in North Dublin. Everyone would get their Christmas shopping there, that kind of thing, right? Everyone in Dublin saw these people. And they were walking up and down outside the store for about a year. They were protesting as well as a signal to the government. At this point, the Irish government was very vocal in its opposition to apartheid South Africa. So it was constantly criticising apartheid South Africa. It had taken a very explicit stance against apartheid and against the regime in South Africa. However, it didn't have a boycott. And in the minds of Mary Manning and Karen Gearing and the other strikers, this was all words and no action. And what they wanted was for the government to ban goods from South Africa, which hadn't happened. Nobody had banned goods from South Africa at this point. This hadn't happened in any country. Not all goods anyway.
Right.
What happens actually is they get in touch with a South African trade union leader named Nimrod Sejake, I suppose it's pronounced. And he was actually in prison with Nelson Mandela. He had to flee South Africa as a political exile, and he had been living in Ireland at this point. And he saw these women and he said, okay, like, I'll support you. So he gave them political support. He walked up and down outside Henry Street with them. And something to really note about this, because it's a story that people talk about very proudly now, is that the Irish authorities, institutions, and people and media did not support them. They got a huge amount of abuse from the church, they got abuse from the media, they got abuse from trade unions. Even the trade unions supported them at the beginning, and then the trade unions said a little while later, they said, no, it's gone too far. You stop. So they were very much outside the mainstream. Middle Ireland wasn't supporting them. I was looking at some clips about this when I was researching it to answer this question. Clips are quite striking. Everyone's saying, Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Would they ever shut up and go home? You know, it's very like that, right? And the thing is, these two women were young. I think they were only 20. They were very, very young at this time. So people didn't take them seriously. They thought they were harping on about stuff they didn't understand. It won't change anything. Loads of people said that, like on Vox Pops, in news reports about this. It won't change anything. Like, what are they doing? There was a whiff of as well of like resentment, I think. It reminded me a lot of that kind of inexplicable resentment against Greta Thunberg that you see a lot, you know, like just people just don't like her because she makes them feel morally inferior, I suppose. Like they feel guilty because they're not doing the same thing. So they just say, oh, she won't change anything, you know, like they just get angry at her instead, even though, you know, she hasn't actually done anything really offensive, you know, to anyone. Very similar to this, people kind of got annoyed that these do-gooders, I suppose. But where she did get support was among other people who had been left, I suppose, out of Middle Ireland. And she got huge support from women. And there was a structural reason for this. God, it ties back into what we were just saying. Because women were the people who saw them every day, because it was women who were going to Dunnes Stores, basically. Right. You just really didn't have men going food shopping at that point. At all. Even like when I was thinking about this when I was looking this up, and I was thinking, I suppose even single men, like students, for instance, single male students didn't really go food shopping for themselves. They lived in places like digs and stuff. So they would live in like apartment blocks where you would have a landlady who brings them their dinner. Like that's what was happening in the 1970s, you know, and washing their clothes. Like there's just no kind of sense of going for the big shop as a man at this point. So you really just have women in Dunnes Stores almost exclusively. And of course, these protesters were all women. They were all women except for one man. So it was 10 women and one man. And they very much identified with them. And they got this kind of growing support, this low-key growing support that gets bigger and bigger and bigger from the public. Mm-hmm. Now, what happens at this point is that Nimrod, who is that former political prisoner who was supporting them as well, Nimrod Sejake, he gets in touch with Desmond Tutu, the famous South African Archbishop, who, of course, is trying to confront apartheid at this exact same time. And Desmond Tutu sends a letter to them, to these women, to these strikers, and says, you know, I'd really like to meet you, actually. Desmond Tutu was on the way to Oslo the next year, so in 1985. He was on the way to Oslo because he was collecting a Nobel Peace Prize, and he actually stopped his journey in Heathrow. He said, I need to pause in Heathrow and I'm going to meet the women from the strike. Wow. So the strikers went over from Dublin to Heathrow in London and met with Desmond Tutu. And Desmond Tutu said, like, listen, it's been a year. You've been striking for a year. I really respect this. I would like to invite you to South Africa and see how apartheid is actually happening, like in real time. And they accepted. And the public started collecting money. And the supporters paid for these 10 people to take a very expensive journey, as you can imagine, to South Africa at the time. You know, there was no cheap plane fares at that point. And of course, they needed places to stay and whatever. So they flew to Johannesburg. The Johannesburg authorities detained them immediately when they got off the plane. Oh my God. Put them in a room under armed protection, wouldn't let them out for, I think, a day or a few hours anyway. And they were deported. Yeah. They weren't allowed into the country. They were sent right back out of the country. And when this happened, it made media headlines absolutely everywhere. So everyone was looking at them now. Like that really got the eyes of the world on them, and it put a lot of eyes on the Irish government. So they continued striking for the next 3 years. There were songs written about them. Christy Moore sings a song about them, like a really good song. Listeners, if you want to look that up, it's called Dunnes Stores, where he really rips apart Dunnes Stores and he calls them greedy, like immoral, grubby like people, and that these workers are like the heroes of the song. It's a fantastic song. Yeah, they become kind of celebrated. And of course, remember, everyone's seeing them every day. Dubliners are passing them every day, walking past Henry Street. Local shops had started putting up signs. Fruit sellers had started putting up signs saying, our grapefruits are not from South Africa. And then like local shoe shops would put up signs saying, our shoes are not from South Africa. They would advertise the fact that they didn't sell South African goods so that people would actually go there instead. Until 1987, when the Irish government finally capitulates, and it became the first country in the world to ban all goods from apartheid South Africa, basically on the back of that public pressure created by the strikers. Once the Irish government did that, that created a bit of a knock-on effect, and all kinds of countries started banning all goods from South Africa, like the Irish government. Wow. So it had this huge effect. And when Mandela came to Dublin in 1990, he came to receive the freedom of the city. He mentioned them. He honoured them. He said how the fact that, I quote, ordinary people far away from the crucible of apartheid cared for our freedom was one of the things that kept him going in prison. So
Gosh.
that's just really, really amazing. And today there is a street named after Mary Manning in Johannesburg.
What an amazing story.
Amazing story. Yeah.
And it's obviously like it comes up all the time now because of the situation with Israel. And there's like a lot, parallels are constantly drawn, and there's pressure on the government to pass a bill. All of this sounds like an episode in its own right, Tim, to be honest.
Yeah, it does indeed. I think we've covered about 6 or 7 full episodes here, Naomi. But listen, listeners, if that wasn't
Mini
a nice little
episodes.
Christmas present for all of you, a big glut of listener questions from our loyal patrons who we owe everything to, by the way. A big thank you to our patrons, because this episode wouldn't be made, or none of our episodes would be made if we didn't have people supporting us on Patreon. So thank you, and Nullah Chana to all of you.
Nona Kala Yiv to all our listeners, and yeah, thank you so much, especially to our Patreon supporters. Don't forget, if you want to get a membership for yourself and get all our bonus episodes, or if you want to get a gift for someone of membership this Christmas and access to all our archive, just head over to patreon.com/The Irish Passport, and we will post the explanation about how to do the gift membership in the show notes.
Yeah, it's fairly easy.
So on for now.
Okay, Slán gach duine.